So let's start with you. Please just introduce yourself in whatever way you want to, actually. Say as much about you as you think is relevant to anybody listening to get into who you are.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Immy. I'm one of the co-founders of an organisation called Civic Square. Previously, people might have known me in founding and running Impact Hub Birmingham here in the West Midlands, and I was part of the group that curated and brought to life TEDx Brum. I previously worked in housing and international development, and previously before that studied the sciences. I live in Birmingham. I grew up in Birmingham, and I think that's probably everything that's relevant right now to introduce myself.
All right, good. So just give people a clue. How do you think you were politically socialized, so to speak? What made you think of yourself at all as a political person?
So actually, I think this is a really good question, because for most of my life, I don't think I actually had a really meaningful relationship with politics in its traditional sense, with the sort of the big P. My parents were immigrants to the country from India. They both came as teens, and so they had me very young as soon as they got married. They'd had really difficult teenage years, both of them, for a range of different reasons. And like many first generation immigrants, they absolutely hunkered down on what was going to build the best life for their children. So education, protecting us from any type of trauma, not really overly doing anything other than creating the most safe, nurturing childhood they possibly could. And what I realised now, it was very intentional what they were doing. When I later hear stories of my parents' childhoods, I realise how much they wanted to protect us from. And a little bit later, much to my parents' glory, I got a scholarship to a private school, spent a couple of years there, and that turned my life around in terms of many things that I thought I might be able to do. At that time, I hadn't realised any of the things I realise now about English society. I was naive and young and doing what I thought was absolutely right, which was following the one thing that my parents really wanted me to do, is keep my head down and do well and not have the life that they had. That's all my young years were about. Meeting one goal after another, being surrounded in a large, connected, beautiful family with strong matriarchs holding that together, with this idea that you just need to make sure you don't have the childhood that we had. And we want to give you more, we want to give you better. And, you know, and they did that with a lot of sacrifice. But for them, this was their main goal. And that's how I was socialized into the world. I went to this school, and everybody was in big P politics was a Tory voter, Conservative voter. So I thought that's what I must be. So that's what I decided. I remember updating book political views one day, writing Conservative and going, okay, cool, that was it. I didn't think. We had no political history in school. We weren't taught about any of this. I had no idea the history of anything. I went off to university. I had a really close, sudden, tragic death, which in my family, which turned things around a little bit. And I left what I was doing, went off and travelled a little bit back to Punjab in India, came back and didn't know what to do, had only learned one thing. I'd learned that the way you decide what you're going to do in your career is to study it. So I was suddenly like, okay, well, I'm not going to be a doctor anymore. What am I going to be? I didn't have this understanding that you had never been taught in that way, to have a fairly conservative education. And, and I understand why my parents had pushed me in a certain way, or encouraged me to have something that was tangible and a job and some sort of social status, all the things that they felt that they never had. And so I decided, right, international development must be the thing. So I went and studied that, and went and got a job in a charity in London, and suddenly started to realise that the world was absolutely not what I thought it was. And I genuinely say that, and I realize it's such a privileged position to wake up at 23, 24 and say, hold on a second, what is this all about? And that's where my journey into all the work that I've done now honestly started. It was not, I was not in a radical activist family from a young age who'd been about all of this. The experiences I'd had, which I now reflect on later in life, have taught me so much, both positive and negative, and everything in between. But that's what happened, and it started from understanding the role of aid in the world, understanding colonial histories through international development, starting TEDx in my local city. What I originally thought was just bringing people with ideas around to get something done and use some skills. What I then realized was all that knowledge, that organizing, hearing from thinkers and artists and people were challenging the status quo. Starting to learn about politics bizarrely in my mid-20s, actually starting to go, oh, so how does all of this work? Like, what are the political parties? What are councillors? What are MPs? What are they doing? What is their history? What has been the legacy of different governments? Words like socialism, conservatism, centrism, these things had never come into my work. I didn't know any of it. And so suddenly I went for a steep learning curve, surrounded by actually hundreds of people suddenly telling me all about this stuff. And I realized how sheltered so much of that had been, and having a deep appreciation for why my parents had done that and how much trauma and scarcity and survival they'd done it from. But then what had happened to me at the age of 25 was I didn't know all the things that I needed to know. And so where that brings me to now is having done sort of 10 years of work in that organizing space, in that civic infrastructure, social infrastructure space, having gone through lots and lots of deep reflections about what I feel about the world, what I believe about the past, the impact it's had as a family coming from India, the role of the country I now live in the oppression of my own ancestors, what that means going on. How do you then organize with all of that? How do you practically get things done? Where do you be radical? Where do you put your foot down and say no? And where do you not? And I think as horrendous as this time is going to be, I am so grateful that this is here, because I feel like the last 10 years have been a training ground for where we are. And, as we said before, as you said as well, I recognize my extreme privilege in not being as shaken by this, not just socially and financially, because that's still a little bit precarious, but nowhere near as precarious as other people. But by the fact that actually I had a strong feeling that this kind of huge shift was what we were all working for. And so what I kind of say now is I think about actually what does this time mean? I think I have to honestly say, in sort of week one of England and the UK and the world starting to shut down life as normal, is that I definitely didn't think it would suddenly creep up on me this quickly. I think I felt we had a bit more, kind of keep talking about it, but we still get to wake up and go to park run and have a latte in the local cafe, and it's coming, but actually it's here. And I want to treat this time incredibly sensitively, incredibly thoughtfully, with love and care for the crisis we are facing, but also with some deep intentionality and boldness that let's not creep back into business as usual, where a portion of society basically exploits everybody else on the planet, and somehow we sleepwalk into it. And let's use this time to really rediscover what that new normal is, because I feel like even if we do just go back to normal and the economy bounces back, if we don't fundamentally shift who we are and how we are going to creep back into another one of these very soon. And at that point, there will be no choice. And I think it's really, really, that's really important. So that's what brings me to now.
Mm. And gosh, when you're talking, so many metaphors appear in my head all the time. And one of them would be, that maybe we thought we had another month or so before the baby was born, and we knew it was going to change our lives and whatever. But suddenly, oh my goodness, it's going to be slightly premature. And everything that we, have prepared for has to be ready now. And we could make a mess of it if we're not careful, or we could really draw upon what we've been preparing on and try to bring it right into the present moment. So with that in mind, what is the word in this moment of rapid change? We're in it's not exactly a vacuum, or maybe it is a vacuum. I don't know. What do you think politics is now? How would you describe politics? In your own words.
Okay, so given what I've just talked about, I still have a really troubled relationship with politics as is. I've occasionally veered into the formal system. I've often been encouraged to stand for something, and I've always felt incredibly just uncomfortable. The polarization, the binary nature of the conversations and the discussion, and the behaviour of so much of our political sphere, as well as the incredibly good work that happens, has really troubled me. The way the systemic design of the whole system draws even the best people down into decision making and conversations and polarizations that in any other walk of life they would never be so sort of stuck on, has really surprised me. And I think the role of social media has also been, it's right in your face all day, every day, people fighting each other. And so I don't exaggerate when I say I've been naturally deeply disturbed by so much of that. So much of what young 10 years ago Immy believed was possible came right in so suddenly I have this sort of political awakening, or not even awakening. I just am one of these citizens who've been sleepwalking and not really understanding any of this and not having any real proximity to it, wakes up 10 years ago and suddenly is like, oh, okay, and so we're going to change our place and change our city, and these are the ways in which we're going to engage. And suddenly we come head first into what has been the last 10 years of politics, the financial crisis, watching the bailout happen without real thought or governance around what that money was going towards, other than just bailing out big industries. Watching the tragic stuff around Joe Cox, watching what happened after 9/11, watching what happened through the rise of the Jeremy Corbyn type movement, watching the Labour Party fall to bits in so many ways, watching the further right or the right organise around their general ideas in a very particular way, and watching the left almost crumble in all of this, has been just mind-blowing. Has unfortunately, and it's not the first time I've said this, has really distanced me from that world. Not in a way where I don't have huge empathy for all the work everyone was doing, but just realizing how this system is set up to fail everybody. It fails everybody who's involved. It fails us all, and people are doing an impossible task. Very few people within that system, very few are actually there for power and, incredible overlord type power. And there are a group that are very in on that. But watching that has really troubled me, actually. So that's where actually now, even in the last week, whilst I don't necessarily ideologically agree with the responses to how we want to deal with COVID-19, I still have a deep respect for everybody in any way on the front line right now, through politics or not, because this is a set of impossible decisions. No decision will be 100% correct. No decision will be 100% wrong. People will be dealing with so many different things at the same time. And And then behind that is a whole swathe of civil servants that have often served in many different governments that are desperately often trying to hold on and work during times where they may completely disagree with the current formation of cabinets. And so for me, it's been a time to go through that whole curve of the opportunity, the sudden political knowledge that I felt like I was gifted 10 years ago, and then watching that all come to life. But I think what politics does mean to me now is that I understand there is a deep, deep integrity in fighting for your life, for the kinds of ideas and the kind of world that you and many others, not in a, I don't mean that in an egotistical singular way, that we believe in, because times do present where we heard about that Overton window, and I remember when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, okay. And all of a sudden now, things that even 6 months ago were talked about as completely unfathomable, completely impossible to do, too expensive, too large, too grandiose, too socialist, too whatever, now are suddenly things that might be the only things that even allow us to survive as a society. And that, you know, what a gift. You know, if I live an average life at 34, what a gift to know there is absolutely the point in fighting for your lives. But I think what it's made me realize, for your life, for your ideas, for what you believe the future can be, what you feel like needs to happen, drawing from histories and indigenous inspiration and wisdom, and melding that with movements and technology and futurism, and empathy and care and love. And it's again a stark reminder of, every year I have this stark reminder, this is going to be a life's work. Actually, good politics of any type is always a life's work that is then passed on to the next generation. And I feel privileged to be in that position. I don't have children. I don't have the same care responsibilities and the same restrictions that my mother or my grandmother or some of my peers are facing. And so what a important time to be reminded of our responsibility and what politics really is. And you know, it's nice to see a little bit of all of those factions being left behind at the moment, as people realize that none of that is going to fight a pandemic, and so they are going to have to, holding people to account and pushing for better ideas is very different to trying to destroy the integrity of someone's view that you don't agree with. Come into a space where you can keep continually working out the future is interesting. I'm also finding it really interesting, just to finish, to watch some peers, thinkers, doers talking about big ideas that they've talked about for many years in the government's language right now, to try and persuade them that it's the right thing to do, as opposed to fight for the integrity of which school of thought it came from. I don't know. You know, as an activist, there's often a lot of conversation about what is selling out or what is, you know, and I'm interested as to what will get adopted, how, and who will bridge those gaps, because centrism, or people who work, has become an incredibly dirty word, and I understand why. I've lived through lots of reasons why you know, certain types of schools of thought have led us into very dubious decisions, but it's really interesting, and I'm that's my experience of politics and what it means to me. But ultimately it is about fighting with your last scrap for the collective ideas that you believe will build a better future, and most importantly, you might never see, or you hopefully won't ever see, actually, the product of that, because really good, deep, transformative things sometimes take a generation to build. And I know it's a bit of a crass example, but politics means the NHS after the war. It means the reimagination of whole institutions, civic or physical or whatever, that are there as a piece of work from one generation to the next. I hope that's useful.
No, it is, and because I love your perspective of, you know, being being inclusive as a practice, and that meaning, you know, including privileged people with their journey that they're on, and having some compassion for that as well. Let me just ask you though, and I'll ask you to explain more in relationship to the work that you're doing after this question, but I'd just like to release you into this space of what would you dream of as a new politics? You know, if you could just, and I know you do, I know you stand for the power of dreaming and the importance of dreaming. So if you were dreaming of a different political system, if you like, what would that look like to you?
I think that I think there's multiple roles for this. I dream of a more decentralized, local but globally aware, more circular, collective, Eleanor Ostrom polycentric governance type world at a neighborhood level, in a way where we could access what we need and live our most beautiful, stunning lives within half an hour or an hour of where we live. So that we can move into a world where we're not pining for these long haul trips, these things to get away from the world that is our everyday. I need a break from work. I need to go do that thing to get away from the life that I live, because the life that I live is there to earn money, to get through, to survive. It is not the most beautiful, inspiring, connected, resource-filled space. So I'd like to see the things that we do a lot of, to get away from what we live, to give ourselves a break from what we live and the things that can often be very extractive and troublesome, to become far more seen as luxuries, seen as things that we might access for certain reasons and that we have a lot more respect for. And that even, you know, all this online virtual world working is showing us a lot right now. It doesn't mean I'm one of these people who thinks we need to shut all the positivities of a globalized, connected world down. Not at all. But I want the lives that we live at a local level to feel nourishing and rich and collective, so that we can go on to then see how we reform that social contract with the rest of the world, with to live in harmony with the natural resources around us, and for us to have the time and space to think about that and to be able to do that. So I think, firstly, that's the kind of the future that I really want to see. I think we are going to have to go through a period where all the things that we saw as the luxuries or the things we work towards, we're going to have to let go of a lot of that and grieve for that and reform and build in beautiful, stunning ways. I care about the neighborhood and city level unit of change and what strong, thriving, collective, regenerative neighborhoods look like. Really matters to me, and the beauty and the collective ownership of that. I feel like we really need to discover that again. I less have very set ideas about what will happen to the political parties. At Westminster, it's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about. What I do know or what I do feel very strongly about, is there will always be roles for different types of personalities and thinkers and doers and different skills, and at all times I've been humbled in this last 10 years of those who come forward at a time where they need to come forward, those who work and maintain in the background, those who can galvanize and those who can meticulously organize and detail, and I've been incredibly inspired by how people move through those roles at different times of life. And sometimes they need to come forward, and other times they need to step back, and sometimes they need to be meticulous and detailed, and sometimes they can be big and dreamy. And so I want more space between who and why and what you need to do in the world. A final thing that I really care about in this future vision is, I think I mentioned it before as well, we're going to go through a period now where we, having had a government that's talked about low skilled workers who were, lots of things, not to paraphrase too much of what's been said, who are now coming back to the fore, and we're realizing the importance of supply chains and care workers and frontline workers. These are the people who are out there while we're sitting having this lovely conversation, figuring out how to keep things going, dealing with their inner anxiety of their teams, of their families, of their jobs, of their future, having this to reflect. And suddenly these are some of the most important people that we need right now. And so what that leads me to think about a lot is, how do we make sure that we have better ways to value all the different contributions in society? How do we make sure that those who will hopefully come over and take the reins for a bit when we're out of crisis can have the time now and can all these different views and get away from this political game that is played with people's lives and their roles and their jobs and how important they are or they aren't. Right now, disabled people, people with chronic illnesses, people with immunosuppression are saying, we've been living like this for decades, our whole lives, and we have not been recognised. And all of a sudden now, there's this is important and this matters. So in my future of that, there is a much more deeper, nuanced recognition of everyone's value and what it means to unlock people's values, and what is the economic system that sits behind that allows that to thrive. Just because we, in peacetime or in calm, everything's business as usual, we can't see all of that hidden. And I wonder what a young generation who will understand this will do with that knowledge. What the 6 and 7 year olds making cards for those who are in their homes because they're immunocompromised and they're older, and explaining that to a 10-year-old. I wonder what that generation, and I'm so excited about what that generation would do with that level of knowledge, thoughtfulness, care about the resource and the planet around us, the conversations it's opening up. So my vision of politics is one that is more connected, but local for the right reasons, that is in sync and can live alongside, like in the indigenous cultures do, with Mother Nature, and to understand how we do that. I don't know what the structures yet look like. I think Eleanor Ostrom gave us an incredible set of resources to build on. What I definitely do know is the party political system and the two-party system is dead. And I think deep down, so many of us know that, and I think in the general population, there's a sense of that, but there is a fear of, well, what do we do without it? And we're going to start to learn that now, aren't we?
Yeah.
I think that 10 or 15 is going to be, that old phrase of what a time to be alive. Well, those of us who are here are going to have to take the responsibility of being a well active citizen and really think about what it is we're going to be leaving behind.
Right. So let's move to your work. And because I think it's interesting, because I move into these different sections and you cover all the 4 questions just we're obviously thinking in very similar ways. So I'd like now, you've brought me neatly to this point where you've talked about what could be possible, or what you dream is possible. So show or help our listeners to understand how the work that you've been doing for the past so many years and are about to do, how that fits right into that vision.
So what I have been doing for the last 10 years is trying to gently hold on to the good stuff that I learned growing up and let go and unlearn many of the things about what success, what a strong economy, what the household, what all these things look like. I come from to talk personally first, I come from a very privilege. Like it's a privilege to come from a family where both parents were married, to have a sibling, to have relative security over everything. The first 10 years were very precarious of my life, but my parents were immigrants and they did that thing of protecting us from everything and providing for us in very nourishing ways, even if that might not have been financially. And so what that led to is really doing lots of work to learn. It started off with some very like big global platforms, jumping onto things like TEDx and the Hub network, which I'll talk about a little bit more. Jumping onto them not because I was hugely interested in big commercial success, but because actually I felt like I had no legitimacy. I didn't know who I was, or I found myself in a bit of an identity crisis when I left behind what all my peers were doing and all the jobs that they'd taken and the types of lives they were going into in a family where, you know, all my cousins were also in the same position and they'd all taken routes and jobs that were, you know, bankers and lawyers and things that were traditional careers. I hid behind these big global platforms because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether it had legitimacy. I couldn't figure things out. And I, as a woman of colour in Birmingham, and looking at the leadership across like a lot of our big public institutions, I didn't feel there either that there was any way for the things that I was thinking to emerge. So TEDx became originally a bit of a hobby to bring some people around around a time where I'd taken a decision to leave the corporate sector and come back home and work in social housing and other things. But it quickly grew into understanding the power of ideas and community organising and convening and bringing people together and running a team and understanding how so much of different people's skills can emerge, getting lots of things wrong, understanding what you can do without money, what money is required for, learning all the stuff about who you do take sponsorship from, and just a steep curve like of being a person with a lot of passion and ideas and then trying to think of somewhere to put that all into, which led to us thinking about something more permanent in terms of a physical space and giving a home to that organising. And I met Indy Johar from 00 during that time. And through 00, I started to learn about polycentric governance, not necessarily like the ideal way of it, but people trying to think about what that could do, thinking about distributed, open source, citizen-led housing and furniture and visions for cities and just so many things that I had not learnt before. And the collision of TEDx and 00 and these visionaries that had left behind their careers and built a new way of thinking and organising was just a baptism of fire. And that led to the Hub. Again, the Hub was another way to go, okay, there's a network out there doing this work. There were some incredible leaders there, and we started to build a physical home to move away from this startup idea of social enterprises will save the world, but to think about how do communities organise systemically, how do we deal with the everyday, but think more broadly about what the future could be, how do we bring together all the best of what we know from all the different types of thinking and worlds we come from, like the arts, culture, science, politics, startups, all of this, and how do we build a more inclusive collective narrative rather than startups will save us or innovation will save us or smart cities will save us or whatever the next thing that's going to save us is, and how do we start to have a better, more inclusive conversation. At the same time, I started to learn about having that entrepreneurial flair, using a business model to use space, create space, generate revenue, try and stay out of just grant systems. And then what does it mean over many, many years to convene communities? What power does space hold? What power are we then wielding, and how did we use that, and how do we look at more inclusive, regenerative business models? And that's what we were doing for the last 5 or 6 years. We did tons of things as almost an R&D. What I realise now, it was an R&D of what's possible, understanding the politics of our city, understanding how to grow ideas, how to both have vision and do what's needed today from the ground up. And that isn't that there isn't vision coming from communities. There absolutely is, but you know, we also built all of this in 10 years of austerity. So people's version of what they need was often very real and important, and not necessarily thinking about the big ideas of the future. So how do you nurture and balance all of that, and when's the right time to support crisis, and when's the right time to push us to a new reality, is what we've been learning. So to take that right down to the granularity of right now, it also meant that we learned the very harsh reality of the deep systems that hold so much of this work back. Land, ownership, a lot of the stuff that we don't see about when you're leasing from landlords, when you're trying to utilize space, how much power they have over the future of places, and organizations like ours, and over again seeing that play out across the social sector, which also meant in the last couple of years we've really been fighting for more people to pay attention to the systemic factors as to why a lot of community or social businesses struggle without assets, why they struggle with the current way that the high street and much of that is set up. And so what we realised in the last couple of years was that we were a good city centre business, we were a good network, and we were doing good stuff, but actually we were much more legitimate to go right down to the sort of neighbourhood unit of change for many, many different reasons. Because a lot of what we were doing at the hub, from cooperative childcare to cooperative housing to organising to workspace to giving space for ideas and communities to come together, needed to be at the unit and the layer of the neighbourhood. In an ideal world, somebody would just give me the fledgling library and we'd find a way to repurpose that for the 21st century in an Eric Klein Palaces type vision, maintaining the integrity of the public library, but understanding that the public library was part of a history of infrastructure that was invested in times of huge transition. So that's what we're doing now in Civic Square, really thinking, okay, well, if spaces like that are currently heavily politicized and not necessarily where communities like ours can jump in, then what are the new civic infrastructures and institutions this generation is going to have to seed to allow so much of that? And so much good work across the country and world, from Participatory City to the Winnipeg Boldness Project to many others are talking about this. Urban planners and architects are talking about this. Those who've been banging on the door about the ecological, environmental future have been banging down the hatchets for this for a long time. And so we're thinking very much now about what is the infrastructure at a neighbourhood level that we need. How does big money that's coming down the line for housing and regeneration be used in the most circular and smart way? How do we make sure that we have new financial instruments that create things like neighbourhood trusts that keep these sorts of things rolling beyond grant or ability to generate revenue? We know how fragile the ability to generate revenue is in times like this, and that's why the whole move for social enterprises will be the thing that saves us was always a troubling one, because no one thing in times like this can, and this ability to only survive through revenue or through business is also not necessarily the smartest one. So we're thinking about lots of things now. Obviously everything's taking a huge pause, but we're looking at what happens when big money comes into an area for regeneration. How do you create inclusive methods for the local neighbourhood to be the ones that benefit from that most, beyond just jobs? How do you protect that for the long term? What sort of resources do we need in these spaces? Making equipment, community infrastructure, sharing libraries of things, community kitchens, access to green space, cooperative childcare, access to collective collaborative housing projects, ways to vision and have community foresight, to organise, to own, to work, to create, to make. All these things is what's in the Civic Square vision. but also most importantly, we want to think about the idea of the neighbourhood in a broader way, not getting lost in political boundaries or boundaries that are created around people, but in boundaries that are to do with what makes sense. So there's a big movement out in the world, in the urban kind of design planning world, around the 20-minute neighbourhood. It's not huge innovation. It's not new. It's been talked about lots. It comes from that medieval organising neighbourhood. Houses were closer together. Cars didn't take up an extra 10 metres in front of your house. You were able to walk 10, 15 minutes to everything, the main things that you need in life. And so thinking about what that looks like, as opposed to a piece of work is legitimate if it sits within this boundary or that boundary, but instead is about how we live and connect and join up these things together. There would have been a lot out there in the world literally this week if all of this hadn't happened. We're going to slowly start to pivot and to bring that to life. I think more than ever, I realise now that it's the right journey to go on. Neighbourhood by neighbourhood, place by place, we are going to have to rebuild the new economy, the new social contract, the new way we govern, live, connect together. And I don't think COVID-19 is going to be the pinnacle. I think we're going to have to go through a couple of things, and then we realise there is no bouncing back to normal. And I hope now Civic Square as an organisation will try and live and grow that new future in practice. And what I say just on that is I always hope that Civic Square is the worst version of this. You know, what we want is to build something that then other people can take apart and spread and grow in their places. And also recognise that so much of what we will build is building on not only wisdom and Indigenous knowledge, but from the knowledge of so much other work that's happening around the world.
Right, I just wanted to pick you up on that. And as I say, you always go to the point I would have asked next, but I'm going to ask you to expand a little bit more on that, because I love the idea of the 20-minute neighborhood, and that it's intense relationship and trust gets generated in that kind of space. But other people might say, oh my God, you know, so many people have never moved out of their local community. They've never, their boundaries have always been very implicit. And that's part of the problem, you know. So how do you, and you mentioned it earlier, but can you practically describe what it would mean for people to be globally informed in their, newly, or, even in an old sense, better connected or better related neighborhoods?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're completely right, because so many people's lives are characterized by that confinement to places, which means that often they haven't had the experience of other cultures, other ways of being. It doesn't develop that psychological flexibility that we know helps people deal with stress or change. And I think I don't have clear answers on any of this, but one of the things I always think about that space is that it's about choice. So for a lot of people, that confinement has often not been out of choice. It's been out of circumstance or what they feel is accessible for them or their world, or literal, absolute, or relative poverty, or so many different accesses to things that that many others take for granted. And I think that I'm not one of these people that's here to say everything as we know it is over, but we certainly know that there is a proportion of society that over-utilizes the chance to fly everywhere, that over-utilizes the chance to be able to get on a train and have access to so many different things all the time. And so I don't think it's about pushing everybody back in. That's it, everybody's got to live like this now. It's about who has the choice to have experiences that open their minds, who has access to platforms and digital ways of organizing, who has access to be able to fly and learn and go to other places, who has access to the more sustainable ways to go by the Eurostar as opposed to flying. All of these things are part of a macro story about who and what has access to all of this. And again, it's not about pushing everybody together in a way that is a punishment. What I'm really interested in is how we design lives and worlds that mean that so much of our nourishment and our connection and our trust can come from where we live. So we're not having to constantly escape that. And then that escape it is not escape, but that ability to travel and be is more open. It is purposeful. It is it is there for many different reasons for many different people. I mean, half of the sector that we work in this week will realize those multiple trips to that place on that project they were working on this year will still have to continue, but digitally. And so I think there's that level of entitlement about who gets to do that and why they need to do it. And I see it all the time in our sector or our world of working. So I think that there's many different things to answer here. Some are macro, some are about who and what we value and how, and who has access to knowledge and experiences and what that means. But then there's also the micro everyday life. I'm just really interested in what does it mean to design lives that we don't want to escape from. And then we can start thinking about, well, what does that mean for all of these other things like travel, like access to opportunities? And I don't have all the answers, but I think somewhere in that we're already getting the first signs, aren't we, of when you reduce the car and air pollution and water pollution. We're getting the signs in Italy and in Venice. The dolphins are signs of what this world could be like. And so I don't know all the answers, but I know where we need to get to. And I know that some of these are connected to many issues of class and history and multiple things about who can and can't explore. Because it's also, I mean, we can go into a whole nother school of thought about what it means for the West to now tell others that never had the chance to like go and explore the world without ravaging it, that they now can't, because you know what, we messed it up for everybody else by stealing their resource, by overly designing a world where some people had access to everything and felt like they had the right and entitlement to every bit of every culture, you know. So there's a whole nother world there to talk about, which I don't want to go into here. And this is all stuff that we need to go through. These are processes of reconciliation, of reparation, of design, and grief and anger and so much more that we're experiencing now. You know, one of the first to COVID was immunocompromised people saying, hi, we've kind of been saying this for a long time, thanks for recognizing us now. That there's going to be a big period of grief and anger and reparation and reconciliation, and it won't all be linear, and that will be part of this journey. And somewhere out the other side, I really hope that we design lives we don't want to escape, neighborhoods we care about, we can live in sync with each other, with nature, with the ecologies around us, whilst also creating the conditions to benefit from the beautiful connected world and ideas we have. And somewhere within that, there is also still the space for that healthy part of competition, what nature teaches about us about competition and moving things forward. It's a big new world out there somewhere, and I think there's a nudge that we have to go through to get there.
Yeah. It's very evocative, and yeah, I'm very welcoming of what you're bringing. And I know that Civic Square has been, you know, really evolved out of your experience. But every now and then I hear you referring to the human being and the citizen. And I've heard your story of your own development, where it comes from and so on. But I just want to invite you for a minute and to think about what is your concept of the human being, actually. You know, because you're such a you know, active community worker, and I hear you putting the system together and operating in all levels of the system, and you know, how they might integrate in new ways, all of which is very welcome. But what for you, I don't know if you can just think for a minute, what is your own concept of the human being? I mean, are you a spiritual person, or are you I've heard you refer to yourself as a warrior. What do you think we are as human beings? And maybe invite you to think about how that is changing in this moment. If this is a changing moment, if the old politics thought of human beings like this, what is this human being you're pointing at that might be different?
Yeah, I find this one a very difficult question to answer at a theoretical level. But because I think I moved through lots of schools of thought. I studied philosophy when I did levels, and I agreed with different bits of everything, and I found that really difficult to kind of talk about. What I can talk about is my personal experience of my faith, which I keep actually quite private, in the sense of it doesn't play out in my work in a way that, say, I don't know, like say a church community group or somebody like that, where you could see the link more obviously. Obviously you can look at me and you can see lots of markers of a signal to faith. But as a Sikh, I think that constant learning journey that we're on is something that is very important to me. The word Sikh literally translates to learning. So that's something that's been really key. We talk about the reference to warrior. We're called to stick to a few very clear things, of which being both a spiritual and physical warrior. And when we talk about physical warrior, the warrior-esque part of that is about pursuing justice. So in many times in life, that might have been a physical battle. In other times, it could be a battle with systems and resource. And that's definitely the one I see more now, to what we understand to be an unjust world of oppression or hierarchies, or many things which I'll share a bit more about later. And then the spiritual warrior piece is about the deeper philosophical part that we're called to meditate and work on, but practically also that discipline, the mental discipline of how we live our lives and how we understand is ourselves in that is really important. I think it links to a concept that I have been reacquainted with recently around psychological flexibility and the ability to deal with stress, and how people who are able to psychologically be more flexible with what the world is holding and what is happening day to day deal with stresses in very different ways. And I definitely think that gave language to something that I feel about a lot. My faith and that discipline helped cause me to understand my physical body as a vehicle for that must be kept well and healthy, and as I was sent here, and and it's there to perform a service that is about sharing what you have, earning an honest living, sharing that in bold ways. And I remember Indy talking about how for him that he took a lot of that stuff much more seriously in even like open source design and all of that. He literally translated these Sikh principles about openness and sharing your work in a very radical way, and connected to this Creative Commons open movement, which I remember when I heard that, I thought that was really fascinating. So this idea that we're here to serve a broader mission that is requires discipline, it requires a clarity of vision, and it requires to only do things that then serve the public and common good, and to be able to share that. And when I got that extra link of what that meant in terms of technology and other things, I started to go into overdrive about a lot of where I come from, and so many things in this really matter, in the sense of some of the deeper principles we have around not having attachment. I mean, we literally talk about not even being attached to your partner or your children, and all of, and I don't mean that in a way that doesn't mean providing love or care or nurturing, but that actually this is not our role here. Our role isn't to become attached to things and people to the point where it becomes destructive, and we're constantly trying to protect that and protect the idea of self and protect that household and protect, like, it's, attachment is good, just like other things, but we see it as a vice, just like lust and other things, that when it goes too far, it can start to make you protectionist and isolationist, and how that's not what we're here for. And that's what also brought me to a lot of Kate Raworth's work around Homo economicus, and understanding how that going too far takes us to that place, this individual. And finally, we really believe in the concept of what's called sangat, and what that can translate to is community. So near on everything, apart from a very few things that we do to keep ourselves individually well and disciplined, is about doing that with other people. And so I later in life have been able to make links as to why a more thoughtful, faithful way of living and disciplined way of living my life has helped me with the work. Where that leads me to more generally, because it's not, I don't ever talk about this publicly really, because we're not evangelists. It's not like, if everybody was Sikhs, we'd be fine. Although some of the Sikhs listening to this will be like, why haven't you said that? What I think about is about these ideas of what we're called here to do, how we are in the world, what that means, how we think of ourselves as humans, our role, and that we're passing through here to live in sync with the planet, with each other, to serve a consistent role, to work collectively, to fight for justice, to make the world a more collective, that we're meditating and focusing on the right things. And so I think what's been really interesting in the last couple of years is seeing the meditation like movement become digitalized, and people really taking that seriously. And I think it goes back to that same point that I said before. All of that is people trying to escape the life that they've created. Like, I need to meditate to calm myself down from this situation I'm in. And I think that I have worked to try and take control of that, back control of all of that and why I am. So I don't think I have a clear answer for you around my concept of the human, but I definitely understand where I can translate a lot of the things that I see and feel into everyday practice, and you see it in my work all the time. And I enjoy being able to do that without having to be like preachy about the faith element of it, right? Because there's so many different schools of thought that work in many different parts of similar thinking, and so I'm interested in a set of values that helps us connect in ways beyond. And I wonder how a lot of the conversation that many really great economists and others are talking about this shift out of this rational economic man and the household and the commons, and where we need to move towards, like, so much of that will relate to so much of what I've learned, and this one's probably my most confused one. Like, it's definitely, I don't have clear answers on this, but a colleague of mine in the team also is probably, there's a couple of us that follow different faiths, and what's really interesting is that we're quite similar in how we live. When we're in a massive moral quandary about something, and neither of us can figure it out, and we see the rest of the team dealing with things in different ways, we'll often laugh at each other and say, you know, well, isn't it just relaxing to have a faith that you can just follow the rules on? So when you don't know what you're doing, you follow the rules and hope for the best. But what that takes me back to is actually a lot of our work, and a lot of the work across 00 and Dark Matter and at Civic Square has been about changing the rules. A lot of the stuff that I care about with Eleanor Ostrom's work is about the rules of how we live together. So, you know, in a previous iteration of the world, faith maybe did that in very particular binary ways, but it's something about what are these collective agreements, this social contract, these rules that we know are just about enough to hold us together and move us in a way. Because sometimes you don't know what on earth, like, who knows? There's no book right now to say, what do you do in a pandemic right in the back end of 10 years of austerity and the death of capitalism? And well, nobody knows. So nobody really knows, no matter how much they're telling you they know. And so at that point, you have to have a value system that you can hold on to, or something that allows you to rebuild that new value system or that new social contract. And that's where, for those listening, a really nice academic version, a thoughtful version of this has been written by Alistair Parvin in his series about the new social contract on his Medium. I'd recommend having a look at it, because it's part of this whole story. And I think that somewhere in that is an answer that I don't have, but maybe someone can make something of it.
Well, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on what you said about the values, and because what I heard from you is that people would really benefit from having some sort of idea of how to be all the time, as opposed to just in moments of crisis, or, you know, and that is, I suppose, what a faith is that you hold it internally the whole time. Mm-hmm. But also you used some intriguing words like being able to be in control of something, you know, and being able to at the same time take attachment lightly, you know, to challenge our attached nature. And what I feel is implicit all the time, especially when I'm talking to younger people, is this need, actually, you know, because we don't have, we're not taught at school anymore. You know, when I was growing up, I went to a convent school, and I was taught about the internal system that would keep us strong and keep us in service and so on, and all these other things. But there's nowhere to teach that anymore. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it's not somehow, and should be acknowledged in some way, implicit in the new politics, that there's an internal aspect as much as there's an external aspect of ways to be in the world if we want to give rise to something that is more fair. Yeah. You know, so I'm slightly in dialogue with you here more than, but it's always felt to me that it's very difficult to have an equal world if you're conceiving of most people as being weaker than you or more vulnerable than you. Yeah. Because that builds into it privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is, you know, there's a piece where it is a tool in your box of tools of life, has to be about being able to be able to understand, collectively work with, collaborate with people who are different, who are similar, who hold different types of views, who believe in different ways of things and the world, of holding different things sacred, and it's a constant act of rebuilding and reimagining all of that. Like, you know, every day when you walk out of your house, depending on where you live, or a lot of these new neighborhoods that I'm seeing where people are starting to have better neighborhood design, you know, every day that's an act of who you are, how you be. When someone's, well, in this world, hopefully in the future it won't be this, but when someone's car's parked in front of you, and someone's, you know, suddenly COVID-19 has reminded us that we need to check on people and help with stuff. And, you know, this is an everyday act. Every day you have to wake up and think about who you're going to be in the world. The economic systems that we work with have meant that so many people are not able to do that. We're often, so many people are looking above for answers, that and are being used as tools of division, and making so much feel lost and hope lost, so that some political leader is going to tell us that they're going to sort that out for them. And so I think all these things about organizing principles, and how do you deal, like, nobody teaches you what you do when you go to a new place, when you start a new school, it's all very practical, but it isn't about the practices that help you to maintain psychological flexibility, help you to reflect on a situation. I think the most reflective thing that I was ever taught when I was younger was when I was making a decision to do like a list of pros and cons. What are the pros of going there? What are the cons of doing this? But now we're starting to see so many richer tools for, like, if this, then what does that mean? And if you were to look at me behaving my best in the situation or worst in the situation, how we've got all these great tools that we can not only use with each other, but can think about how that embeds into children's education, the role of play, the really important role of psychological flexibility, the role of being able to imagine. Like, I'm thinking so much about all the systems that are about to collapse and need to be reimagined. There's a whole population who's 2, 3, 4, 5 out there that doesn't even know that that's what's coming next. What would it mean to just, like, not get them on that treadmill and be able to do all that? So I think there's all this. These are all tools. These are all things that come with some of the things that we're now starting to be seen captured by the tech industry and other people. So meditation, reflection frameworks, ways of group learning or thinking together. You talk to my grandma, she'll laugh sometimes when I tell her about the things that exist now in digital ways, where she'll be like, yeah, that's a very normal thing, it's been happening for many centuries, and it's just because tech has captured it as something new. Reminding people to go for a walk, in the fresh air, take your socks off and stand on the grass. These we're going to have to, like, train people back into how to live and be. And I think that all the tools are there. It's now just going to be how do we, what sort of power, who wields this power, who gets to profit off it, who gets to is all in flux at the moment. And that's going to be part of this period of grief and claiming back some knowledge, and to give rise and power and what's the word, gratitude to indigenous wisdom that was pulled apart by globalization, that was destroyed, that was ravaged, which and was treated as if it was just a commodity to trade, to take the best of, and to leave everything else behind, and for certain people to profit from that and others not to. That is all, like I said before, going to be a period of what we need to get through before we can start to really do this in a way where it isn't just about who builds the meditation app and who can remind us to take our socks off and go for a walk on the grass every day. Like, there's a weird end of capitalism period to come through here yet.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to draw this to an end, because we've been going for a while, and thank you very much. I feel I've got a very comprehensive vision of who you are and what you're doing. But if you would like to invite people to anything in the future, so in terms of your Civic Square initiative, how would you invite people to use what you're doing?
Mm-hmm. So lots of ways. I think right now, with the pause, there's going to be less physical, practical things that are seen that aren't virtual, because once we're a little bit more back on the ground, whatever that looks like and whenever that is. There's a lot of very practical things that I want to talk to people about around regenerative cultures, regenerative business models, regenerative buildings, regenerative governance. There's so much of that that will be playing out through both deeply local experiments and work and more global opportunities to share. Our aim is to share and open things up as quickly as possible, and to be sharing tools and thinking, so that will be a whole space. I think as if this goes out fairly soon, as we move into this period of 6 to 9 months, perhaps the rest of this year, perhaps a couple of years of deep uncertainty, deep a first period of transition, then I think what I want to really think about is a part of our work was that we were going to bring to life later on at a neighbourhood level was very much about collective public imagination about the future and places that they want to not only live in but be part of creating for, and to be good ancestors to the next generations of. And I think we may be bringing some of that work forward to really think about how we capture that energy sensitively, with empathy and compassion for the really difficult times that we're in, but also to harness the incredible energy that is sitting latent at the moment, wondering how it's going to make a living and all of that. So in the more immediate future, if you're interested in that community foresight, public imagination, regenerative futures type work, we're really interested in bringing some of that forward and using what might be a difficult time, but a time where actually we are all isolated with time to think and reflect, and how can we do all that. I keep hearing this thing where somebody keeps saying that when Shakespeare was in isolation for the plague or something, he wrote King Lear, and I kind of think that's great, except Shakespeare probably wasn't looking after children, wasn't
yeah.
going on all this. So the reason why I say that is I recognise that for a while this is going to be the privilege of some people and perhaps not the others, or there's a way of really thinking about all of these students, these university students, these academics, these children who are at home, and why couldn't this be the time where we could really recognise the value of those who are going to build this world and live in this world, and could we capture that, and could we really ignite that and see that at a time where normally so many of all of these children and people would be preparing for exams or other pressures. So I'm interested in lots of that. So if you've got ideas on that, or you're interested in it right now, that's probably where we're at. And I genuinely do believe there'll be, the next phase of Civic Square will start to come to life, at which point will be lots more practical parts about regenerative neighbourhoods to come to the fruition.